Welcome back to the Mercy Cast, where we are learning the art of compassion through life's adversity. I'm your host, Raleigh Sadler. Have you ever had one of those weeks where it feels like not everything is going wrong, but a couple of things went wrong, which slowed you down and made things a little awkward? I've been running perpetually 5 minutes late to everything this week, so I don't know what's going on for you all, but we're just making it happen this week. And sometimes for us, it can be really hard to find our purpose when life gets a little messy, when things get a little out of hand and things get weird. And yes, I like the word weird because I feel like it summarizes so much of what life actually consists of. If you think life is just going to be this clean-cut, sterile thing, then I don't know what you're thinking about, but it's not my experience. I think at the end of the day, things get weird, things get messy. And that is proof that things are human. We are not meant to be perfect because we can't be. There's only one human who's been perfect, and it's not me, and it's not you. And so today I want to figure out, how can we find our purpose in the moments when life is just out of control, when we can't get right, when we keep failing, when we just want to go to sleep? How can we find purpose that will guide us through those times? Today, I'm joined by my friend, Hannah Hughes. She is an author and a podcaster. She is the host of the By Words podcast. So if you haven't listened to it, you really need to check it out. I mean, they're talking about similar themes, kindred. We're simpatico or simpatica. I don't know how you say that. Do you change the ending, Hannah?
Oh, don't ask me.
I don't know these things. But we're one of those. Yes, we are one of those. And I really just love her spirit, her passion, and really her desire to find purpose, even when the defecation hits the ventilation. And so, Hannah, welcome to the Mercy Cast.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to get the chance to talk to you again and just really unpack this, because it seems like, yeah, like you said, we're in the same wavelength here. So I think it's going to be a good one.
Yeah, absolutely. Me too. And, I was so honored to be on your show. And as we were talking, I was like, okay, not everyone is passionate about vulnerability. Not everyone understands that we're called to be neighbors and care for other people, but to care for other people as people who need care as well. And because I think it's really easy, especially when we're thinking about our purpose, to think, well, I've got to have it together. What was that illuminating moment that helped you realize that you don't have to get it together to love other people?
Okay, well, it's kind of a long story, so I'll give you the summary and
take as long as you want. We've got time.
Okay. Well, my background basically is I grew up in a Christian home, great parents, went to church, Christian school, all the things. So I grew up in the church world and with this idea really of what I thought a good Christian was and what I thought purpose was, And so as I started getting older and I started experiencing struggles and my own challenges and these own things in my faith that I had wrestled with for the first time in my life, you get to that point where you kind of have the decision to make your faith your own.
Right.
It got to that point for me. And when I was in high school, I started struggling with a lot of mental health issues, insecurity, body image issues. I was engaging in self-harm and I had suicidal thoughts, had eating disorders. So I just had a lot going on at one time. But through that journey, which I actually ended up writing a book about, this is my book, Waking Up, Living Open, is my testimony of how God really led me through that and brought me to a place of healing. But all of that to say, as I came into my 20s, in early adulthood, I found myself at this point where I was like, this is purpose, I have overcome these things. God has given me victory. I'm strong in my faith. I have my own relationship with the Lord, and I'm so excited to go after all these big dreams that I feel like He's put in my heart, right? And then life goes on. I get married. I have a son, and I start pursuing these things, like writing, speaking. I started my podcast, and then all of a sudden I find myself in this season of really deep depression and struggling again as I was going through some miscarriages.
Mm.
And that was one of the lowest moments of my life. I mean, physically, mentally, emotionally, but even spiritually, it was very hard for me because for the first time in a long time, I had to confront what I really believed it looked like to be this quote, good Christian and to have this cleaned up life and this purpose. And I'm so thankful for God's kindness because I feel, really gave me the time I needed to get to a point where I could get really vulnerable and really honest with him. Because, this is the thing, and I'm sure you've experienced this. I feel like everybody has this point in their life where you go through pain and you realize, okay, I have this decision here. I'm either going to let my pain lead me away from God. Like I'm just going to be like, this is too hard. Like I just can't do this anymore. It's not worth it. Or you can allow your pain and your suffering to draw you closer to him. And that's what I did. And what I realized through that journey is being a Christian doesn't mean, or living in your purpose, being a Christian doesn't mean that you get to this point of arrival where you're finally done struggling, where you're
Yeah.
finally done with suffering, right? And that's what I thought for a really long time. And so what I realized, what I realize now and what I embrace in my faith journey now is that my purpose isn't an absence of pain and suffering. It is how I relate to God in the midst of it. And so, more recently in my faith journey, that has really been my story because just for a long time, I thought, like, if I'm struggling, if I have this pain in my life, I must be doing something wrong. Like,
Yeah.
Christians aren't supposed to keep struggling, right? Like, we're supposed to overcome and have this victory. And yes,
Right.
we do. But also, we still, during our time on earth, are living in this broken world and we're broken people and it gets messy. But does that disqualify us from living in our purpose here? No, I don't think so. So that's kind of how I ended up where I am.
Well, would you say that our pain and the struggles that we're experiencing could be an invitation to seek Jesus, to seek God on our behalf?
I think honestly, that's the perfect way to put it because I thought for a long time that my pain and my suffering was some kind of punishment. And I thought, what am I doing wrong, God? Like I don't deserve this. I'm doing everything right on paper. I'm trying to be a good Christian. I'm trying to trust you. I'm, showing up in my life and going to church and checking all the boxes, right? And I thought for some reason that I had done something wrong or that I wasn't good enough. And it started, coming all back to me. And what I've realized as I've matured in my life and in my faith is that, well, number one, it's not about me. And number two, it's not up to me because when I try to work it out on my own, like where is the faith in that? Like there's no point, right? The whole point of this faith journey is that dependence on God. And I think honestly, our pain, our suffering, the hard seasons in our life are the most clear open door to lead us back to Jesus.
I think when we look at the scriptures, especially when we look at this idea or concept of prayer, it's very easy to get lost in these very verbose, well written prayers. I have this book on my bookshelf. It's The Valley of Vision. Or maybe, to be honest, I'm moving into a new place right now. So it's probably in a box somewhere, or it's lost, or maybe my movers stole it. I don't know. I'm not saying they would, but if they did steal a book, stealing a Puritan prayer book would be the one to steal it. But no, I think about this book because the prayers are so verbose and they're written down, which is something the Puritans would have probably not been a fan of. But anyway, point being, I want to pray like that. I want to have these really clean, sterile, just theologically correct prayers. I want to get it. But
Yeah.
sometimes the best prayer I have is one that I see in the Psalms a lot, and it's
Yeah.
help me. And I think in those moments where I feel overwhelmed or scared, I'm just like, God, help. Help me. I don't know
Hmm.
what to do. And I'm noticing he's answering those prayers.
Yes, absolutely. And it's so interesting. I love that you bring up the Psalms because I think when we think of suffering, when we think of like any kind of struggle and challenge as a believer, we think like we just need to get through it. We need to like move past this, move on. But I love looking at the Psalms because it kind of models for us this really healthy way to process pain. Like pain and suffering doesn't mean there's something wrong. I think it's just a sign of our humanity, right? And our need for Jesus. But I love how a lot of the times when you read through the Psalms, it starts like this kind of dramatic thing, like everyone wants to kill me. God, why have you abandoned me? But at the end, he gets to this point where he can still say, but my soul hopes in the Lord.
Yeah.
Why are you downcast, my soul? And I think for me, what that shows is this model of really healthy processing of emotions, because I used to be someone that would stuff it all down. I felt like I couldn't feel those things because it was wrong. Like, no, I just need to choose joy and put on a happy face. I just need to trust Jesus and keep praying about it, all those things. But I've come to this place where I've heard people say you have to feel it to heal it.
Ooh,
And so getting really honest in our prayers, like, giving it all over to the Lord, I feel like is one of the most healing things we can do, because that's one of the quickest ways we can, get it all out. And then, or I wouldn't even say quick, which is another side note. Like, I really do think that American Christians have confused purpose with productivity. And so
wow.
we think anything that keeps us from being productive must be wrong, and a lot of times suffering and pain or any kind of struggle falls into that category. And so, anyway, I think we need to power through these moments of pain and these hard seasons, when really, what if we just like let ourselves be in them and process them? And I'm not saying like sit in your pit and throw a pity party, but like, what if we honestly came to the Lord and got really raw and honest? And then at the end, we were able to say, my soul will hope in the Lord. And he is still good. And I think sometimes in order for us to get to that point, we have to let ourselves feel the hard stuff. I mean, I think going through my miscarriages and being at some of the lowest points in my mental health are what made my faith stronger, because I got to the end of myself and realized I cannot do this without the Lord.
That's
Like, it
good.
really highlighted and emphasized my need for a savior and the fact that it's not me, you know?
Well, yeah. And I love how you bring up Psalm 103, because when we look at that, he's speaking to God, but he's also speaking to himself. And I've noticed that sometimes we are listening to ourselves rather than talking to ourselves. And
Mm,
we're listening to whatever negative thought we have or whatever impulse hits us rather than saying, okay, but I'm going to speak to my soul here, and I'm going to
mhm,
tell my soul what is true. I'm going to tell my soul who God is. And I think we see David doing that. And it also highlights our need to be in a church body where we hear the gospel proclaimed. We hear someone speaking over us, you are loved. That's what we see in the
mm.
gospel. We celebrate the table that reminds us, it's a visible representation that even if it's crazy right now, you are okay. At some level, it might not be okay right now, but
Right.
cosmically, you are okay. It
Yeah.
you are in Jesus. You are good, even though it may not feel that way, and all signs point to the opposite.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, that is hard. And that's the
Mhm.
thing about faith, right? Like that is our faith. It's holding on to hope when we have no evidence visually, like no tangible thing we can cling to that's showing us we're okay. Like in the moments where I'm like, God, where are you? Did I miss something? Those moments like really do activate our faith. Like we can either shy away from it, or we can let it be an invitation. As you said, I love that language, to engage deeper, because it is so easy, especially in a challenging season when you are struggling and when it feels very just dark and heavy, when you can't see the light at the end of the tunnel. But like that's our faith. That's the whole point of our faith.
Well, and we talk about this concept of finding purpose. And I was recently talking to a friend of mine, Chad Bird, and Chad is a prolific author, though he would never tell you that. He's just very humble guy, but the things he says bring us back over and over and over to the gospel. And we were talking about finding purpose, we were talking about choosing action, and he basically said if you boil down your purpose to the most basic thing that is hardwired into our DNA, it's that we are to love our neighbor.
Mm.
That is our purpose. And we look at the great commandment, love God and love others. And I think when we get to that point where we say, okay, what is my purpose? And then that voice, that inner voice comes in and says, well, you're not good enough, or sometimes you can be needy, or man, you're a little messy right now.
Mm.
We can speak right back to it as we're speaking to ourselves and say, yeah, sure, maybe that's true. We can embrace that accusation and say, yeah, okay, that's true. But that actually qualifies me to love my neighbor because they're not right either.
Yeah.
It's like we're looking for this beautiful symphony when at the end of the day, there's a blessed cacophony that we're all allowed to participate in, you know?
Yes. And you know what? One of my absolute favorite things about the gospel that I just cannot get out of my mind, like the past few years, is I read this book a few years ago, and the author talks about how the gospel is yes, Jesus came to live and die in our place. And he, took away our sins and made us into his righteousness. So now we're reconciled to the Father and can live with him in eternity. Like, yes, that is the gospel. But there's also a piece that we sometimes miss, and it's the Emmanuel piece.
Yeah.
Part of the gospel is he came to be with us. And I love that because he could have done it any other way, but like he chose to live a full human life and experience every bit of pain. Like I love, when it talks about in scripture how we don't have a high priest who can't sympathize with us. Like he understands us. He chose to, and he just loved us so much that he's in it with us, and he still operates that way. Like he doesn't shy away from our mess. He's actually right here in the middle of it. And I just
Yeah.
that gives me so much comfort.
This has come up multiple times in these MercyCast episodes, this question of where was God or where is God when I'm suffering? And if we look at the scriptures, it tells us the answer. He's
Yeah.
right there with you. Because if anyone in creation understands suffering, it's Jesus.
Yes.
And he became like us to save us. And so yeah, he can sympathize, like you said. I love that language because yes, it's so easy to wonder where God is, but maybe the question needs to be flipped around. What's going on with me? Where am I right now? Am I present? Am I processing God's nearness? Even if I don't feel him, scripture says he's omnipresent. So he's around here somewhere. Like, am I being present in this moment, or am I trying to run? Am I trying to get away from my pain rather than face it?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I mean, I will be the first to raise my hand and say, I've been there
Yeah,
so many times where I'm like, God, why? Why would you do this? How could you allow this to happen to me? There are so many times in my life where it just didn't make sense. And I think about the story of the prodigal son. And I always used to get so frustrated because I relate so much to the other brother
yeah,
who was there the whole time. And he was like, how could you do this? Like I've been faithful. I've been good. I've been right here. And where have you been? And the dad's like, we've been together the whole time. Like you have access to all of this whenever you want. Like you're missing it because you're so focused on these other things. And I so often do that in my life now. I'm like, Lord, where are you? How could you do this? He's like, I've been with you the whole time. Like we've been in this together the whole time. Don't lose sight of that because something else is making you feel like you're less than, or that I'm not with you. Like all of those things that we're tempted to believe that distract us from the truth that he has always been here with us.
that's right. And have you ever noticed with the parable of the prodigal son that there's actually two prodigals, but one has gone the way of the law and one has gone the way of just, wow, he just went for it. And then you see
Yeah.
him as a picture of grace, but both sons were lost. And
Yeah.
one's looking good. He's playing the part, but even in looking good, he's got his own mess. And I think there are people who are listening to this that you may fall into that respectable sin category. You may fall into that place where you look the part, but maybe you aren't the part. Because at the end of the day, like, we can't save ourselves. We need someone to come from outside and save us externally.
Yeah.
We don't have it in us to to fix ourselves or to be perfect. And I think when we rest in the fact that maybe we're not totally okay and that's okay, then I think we're able to start finding people along our path. We're able to start living into our purpose. And I think as we operate from that perspective, we're able to see the people who God is bringing along our path more rightly. We're able to see them with the right perspective. I don't know. What do you think about that?
I think you're exactly right. Because as you're talking about that, I'm just realizing when I put myself in the shoes of that other brother, who's just like really tried to do it right, like I've tried to be the good Christian.
Mhm.
Something that I find myself, like, when I look back on my life, there are things that I've done with such good intentions, like I want to do well. I want to make God proud, like I want to be this honorable Christian, but the trouble with that I've seen in that pattern, through that pattern in my own life, is it becomes so self-focused
Yeah,
that we miss our neighbor. Like we're trying so hard to be good that we don't even see the people around us who are in need because
that's
we're
it.
just so focused on being right, you know?
That's it. Oh my gosh, yeah. And you and I've talked before. I think we've both tried to manage perfectionism, and I would say that I'm a recovering perfectionist,
Yeah.
maybe an imperfectionist. That's the golden hour. But I have noticed that perfectionism kind of thwarts like my desire to find purpose. It thwarts my
Mm.
productivity. Could you explain maybe like how that happens or how that's happened in your life? How your own desire for the perfect has actually kept you from the good?
Absolutely. Oh my goodness. Where do I even begin? I am also a recovering perfectionist and achiever. And, I just, I, I always would strive for those things because I wanted to be right and I wanted to be
Mhm.
good. And just like with anything on the spectrum, whether it's drugs, alcohol, sex, any kind of addiction, or chasing perfection and performance, all of it is going to leave you empty because that is not what we were made for.
Right.
And so for me, when I'm trying to perform or earn or be worthy of God's love, I miss the whole point because he's here saying the whole time, like, I already love you. Like, I love you so much. And I have these plans that I wrote for you before you even had a chance to prove how good you were or to even mess up and fail. Like, we don't have to be afraid of failure because it was never dependent on how good we are anyway.
Wow.
And so I found this freedom in my faith to just be honest, like to be willing to get messy because I used to think, oh my goodness, if people know that I'm struggling, I'm going to be disqualified. Who would trust me as a leader
That's
if
right.
they know that I'm struggling? It's all of these things that come in and you start to think like, I can't possibly do the things God is calling me to do if I'm not perfect. I have to be perfect. I have to have this all right. I have to know all the things. And again, when it comes to that point of, just trying to be perfect, that kind of sucks the faith out of it because it's again, self-reliancy, self-sufficiency, self-focus, even with good intentions. And so it's kind of this little, I don't know, it's such an interesting, complex process of unwinding all of that theology
Yeah.
because it was something I feel like a lot of us, it's so ingrained. Like if you've grown up in the faith world and the church world, a lot of it is that kind of ideal for being a good Christian. Like, oh, we don't engage in any of these things. But it's like, well, none of us are perfect. So at some point we're going to fail. At some point we're going to make a mistake. At some point we're going to struggle. We're going to suffer. We're going to have pain. So then what do we do? Does that mean we're disqualified from living in our purpose? No, I don't think it does. So, how then do we process being messy, imperfect human beings trying to do our best while just allowing ourselves to be in this process? And it takes a long time to unlearn those things that are so ingrained in our culture, right? But I think when we just let ourselves be honest, like for me, honestly, a lot of it was just getting so real about the pain and the feelings that I had tried to avoid for a long time because I thought that it would just get too messy for me to be anything good or purposeful or do these things that God was calling me to be. But through therapy and mentorship and
Yeah.
people who loving me through my process, like allowing me to just be a wreck for a little while I was processing all of it, I felt safe to just be honest and say, like, I don't know what I believe. Like, how can I reconcile these hard circumstances with what I believe about this good God? And, just having a safe space to be able to wrestle through that
Yeah.
and get messy and honest, like, I feel fuels our purpose in a way that we would never be able to attain if we were still trying to have it all together and just, be the perfect good Christian, if that makes sense. So it's been a long process of kind of like undoing what I used to believe. And then also being willing to confront the hard stuff of things that don't make sense to me in my faith. And like, can I take this to the Lord? Can we talk about this in church? And I think the more that we're willing to engage with the hard stuff and bring God our hard stuff and our doubts and our questions and our pain, the more we'll see, like, well, first of all, he knew it anyway. Like, none of it's shocking to him. But again, like, he's right there with open arms. He's like, okay, like, let's just be together. Like, I'm still here with you. I never left for a second. So none of this is a surprise to me. And I'm going to stay with you as we continue to walk this out.
Well, it's funny. We follow and I'm going to use a special word here, a cruciform savior, someone who was crucified in our place. This is a messy act. It is a public, disgraceful act. And he was even called, Isaiah says in Isaiah 53 that he was a man of sorrows. He was despised and dejected. And I think for us, when we come at it from this perfectionism place, from this desire to have it all together, we're actually not able to live into our purpose, at least not well, because we're taking ourselves so seriously. Critique can be difficult because our entire being, our entire identity depends on us being perfect. The way that we receive love is by being a good boy or a good girl and having it all right so that we can be worthy of love. And it just doesn't stand up. We fail. And I think for me, when I just hit rock bottom and realized that my perfectionism was causing me difficulty, like I was just really hard on myself. When I got there and realized, okay, I mean, it wasn't like I had this realization. I don't know. It just, when I hit rock bottom, I called a couple of friends and said, here's where I'm at. And it wasn't pretty. And I think perfectionism had driven me there. And when I started to embrace the imperfect, I started to be a little bit more fun. I started to be a little bit more light. I didn't take myself as seriously. I was able to think, well, even if I tried this and I failed, okay. Because I mean, I came up with the idea to do a podcast when I was knee deep in perfectionism, but I didn't start until I started to become an imperfectionist because I was so scared. I wanted to get it right. I wanted my first episode to be perfect. I wanted it to be amazing. And I wanted everyone to be like, oh my gosh, that changed my life. That was the greatest one I've ever heard in my life. And you are the consummate philosopher / podcaster. And I'm just so glad you're on this planet with us. I didn't get that. But you know what? After the first one, I did another one. And some people were like, okay, this one's a little better. And then I started talking to all these other podcasters and they're like, yeah, dude, that's how it works. You got to do 100 episodes before you even know what you have.
Yeah.
That's 2 years. That's 2 years of weekly episodes. Yeah. And I think it's starting to change my perspective of like, there's, whether it's speaking or a podcast, there are moments where I'm like, I completely whiffed that. But then someone will come up to me and they'll say, hey man, that really helped me. And I'm like, huh? That was like the worst one I've done. And so I think I say all that to say there's this genuineness that often comes with our failures and our lack. And I think bringing that into our purpose will ultimately enhance it rather than detract from it. What do you think?
I think you're exactly right. Because kind of going back to that idea of self-focus, keeping you from really being able to engage with people, like I think people are tired of seeing, this Instagram version of Christianity where everything is perfect and clean and, like whitewashed and whatever else. Like people are craving real life examples of faith, which is so funny because that's literally what the Bible is. But we think that it's so not relatable to how we are now. But really, like these stories, in my book, I talk a lot about the power of testimonies. And what I think is so amazing is a lot of people think that testimony means just to say it again, like to say your story, tell your story, tell your testimony. But that original word testimony means to do it again, not just to say it again, but to do it again.
Wow.
And so that's why we relate so much when people share their stories, is because when we testify to the work God has done in our own lives, it's releasing that same power to work again in someone else's life. And you know what? That doesn't require us to have it all together or be perfect. It allows us to just literally take it back to being a vessel that God's power can move through. And that's what connects us, like coming back to that idea of Jesus coming to be with us in the middle of the mess. Like I found in my life, maybe you can relate, like some of my messiest moments where I really feel like I screwed it up were some of the moments where I connected with people more than any other times, because we finally were like, oh, wait, you're not perfect either. Like we're in this together, and those kinds of relationships make such safe spaces for love and community and faith to grow, because we realize, oh, yeah, what the common denominator here is we are all broken people in need of a savior.
Yeah. Well, and as you were talking, I was thinking about your testimony and your story and the loss that you experienced. And somehow along the way, that fueled your desire for your neighbor, that fueled your
Mhm.
desire to care for other people. When did that connection happen for you?
Hmm. I mean, it's hard going through I don't think anyone wants suffering. I remember going through my first miscarriage and thinking, Lord, I'm good on testimonies. Like I don't want anything else. I think I've got a pretty solid story at this point, and I don't need any more big losses or challenges, And
Check, please.
I know I'm like, nope, let's end it here. And so, I had another miscarriage and then another one after that. And at that point, you have people saying like, oh, everything happens for a reason. God's going to use this story and, all these well-meaning things. And I got so frustrated because I was like, I don't want this. Why me? Why is this happening? I don't understand. Like, God, where are you? All those questions. And then it just really brought me back to that idea that, I personally don't believe that God makes bad things happen to us. I think he allows it to happen because we live in a broken world. And then he can always use it for good. He can always use it for good. And so what I decided at that point again was like, am I going to let this piece of my story disqualify me and take me out? Am I going to just not share this piece and like let it be what kind of like keeps me quiet? Like the shame of suffering sometimes tempts us to stay quiet.
Yeah.
Or I can allow this to be something where, and again, I don't think that it's this thing where God's like, you have to share your story in order for me to get glory and you have to tell everyone about all of your suffering and pain. I don't think that. However, I did get to a point in my healing journey where I felt ready to share. And as soon as I did, God showed up and brought me so many women that were saying, me too. I'm going through it too. I've gone through it too. I feel so alone. No one's talking about this. And I have questions about my faith and I feel really lonely and I feel really, disappointed in God and angry and all of these things. And I'm like, wow, like I hate that I had to go through this to understand that. But honestly, Lord, what a gift that I have this understanding now of a new kind of suffering that so many people go through. And I remember even after I wrote my first book, I shared everything about my story up until that point, except my experience with sexual abuse, because at that point I wasn't ready to talk about it.
That's right.
And so years later, I got to this place in my healing journey where I felt like the scar was there, but it didn't sting to touch kind of point in my healing. And so I felt like the Lord gave me this opportunity, this invitation, and he was like, I will use any piece of your story that you want to share, but anything that you're feeling shame about and hiding, it's robbing you from healing and me from being glorified in it. And it was kind of just like this, I don't know, I felt like it was kind of like, all right, ball's in your court. If you feel like you want to share, you have the invitation to, and I will use it. And I sat on it for a while. And then once I finally felt ready, I shared that piece of my story. And it's actually what opened this whole new chapter of my life, which is when I started By Words and my podcast and my community, which is based on the verse in Revelation that says, we overcome by the blood of the Lamb and by the words of our testimony. And what that means to me is there's two ways that we overcome. Obviously, the gospel is Jesus did the work. It's the finished work that he did for us on the cross. And the second part is this invitation that we have to engage in the overcoming work by sharing our testimony, by the words of our testimony, you know? And so it got to that point for me, same thing with my miscarriages, where I was like, I feel like God has done a healing work in me that I now feel ready to share because I know other women are going through this too. And other people experience grief, you know, and maybe they haven't gotten to that point in their healing, but I could offer some sort of hope on the other side of that pain, you know? And so that's kind of what it looks like for me now, sharing about suffering and loss and those kinds of hard seasons.
And you're doing it from a place of healing. This is something you've been processing. You're not necessarily, I don't know what they call it, like trauma dumping on people. You're not saying,
Right.
all right, here's all my issues, fix them.
Yes, there's a healthy time and place.
Yeah, exactly. But what I found is it's the things, I keep coming back to this idea, the things that we think disqualify us actually qualify us to connect with other people because they make us relatable. And if our
Yes.
purpose is grounded in this presupposition that ultimately our purpose is to love our neighbor, we're here to love God and love others, and God's love frees us to do both. If that's true, and I believe it is, but if that's true, then that also frees us to open up in a healthy manner about our testimony, like you say, like, man, I hate that you're going through that, but you know, I was in this place and it may not, it's not a one for one and it's not exactly there, but I do know this. I know what pain is and I don't like it either. And I'm sorry you're going through it. And I'll pray for you. I love you. I'm here, but I'm sorry because it's not fun. And I'm sorry that you're suffering. I think sometimes when we just approach people from that compassionate place, we start to discover how God is, I don't know, maybe like bringing people into our path or giving us opportunities to care for people, or how he has poured his grace into our life. And I know that sounds really like spiritual, but how he's worked in our lives to help us better serve others.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love how you always bring it back to loving your neighbor and how, you know, our vulnerabilities qualify us to relate and to do that well. Because when I think about the gospels and Jesus's time on earth, like one of the most powerful things that he did was just be with people. Like he was just with people and he healed people, but he didn't see people as a problem to be fixed. Like my pain, my suffering isn't something that just needs to be fixed. Like we look at some stories in the gospel of Jesus just having dinner with people and then all of a sudden their lives are changed because he was just with them, you know? And so I think we have this opportunity to just be with people in the pain. We don't have to fix the problem. We could just be with them and love them. And Jesus shows up in that and he does the work of healing, you know?
Well, yeah, it's that idea that we talked about, especially at the beginning of this idea of finding our purpose in the mess. What Jesus did was super messy. He's connecting with tax collectors and sinners, the outcasts, people with rap sheets, people who are seen as victimizers, and people who in many cases are victimizers, people who have taken advantage of others, people who aren't trusted. And he hangs out with them not from an arm's distance, but he's embracing them. They're eating together, they're drinking together, they're laughing together to the point that he is identified with them. And I think
Yes.
as we're trying to find our purpose through all this craziness that we're experiencing, we'll start to realize we're finding it when people start identifying us with the people that we're spending time with. I think there's a kernel of truth there. Like, I think, and I'm not saying this is how you become Jesus. This is not my point. But I think Jesus hung out with messy, broken people. And sometimes his followers are afraid to do that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, which is a real bummer because I think, you know, sometimes some of the richest growth and healing we can experience is engaging with people who are different from us. And I know you and I have talked about before, like when it comes to loving our neighbors, a lot of us want to stick to neighbors who are just like us.
Yeah.
But we miss out on so much when we limit that interaction, like, and so much of perfectionism and this chasing this productive achiever mentality version of purpose keeps us boxed in there. And we never really engage with the people God may put right next to us in our path because we're so focused on being good and so focused on being right.
So maybe if you're listening to this and you're thinking, I want to find my purpose, maybe you aren't seeing your purpose in the right light. Maybe your purpose is a little bit simpler than this wild idea that's going to save you and save all of humanity. Maybe your purpose is just settling into that great commandment and knowing that even as a messy person, you're loved, you're cared for. Jesus lived for you, he died for you, and he rose for you. He is with you. He is with you in your suffering. And that frees you to take your eyes off yourself and that incessant need to protect yourself. And actually, it frees you to look to other people who may speak truth into your own falsehoods, other people who may speak comfort into your discomfort, but also people that you can track with. And I think if we just simplify it, we're going to be more content and we're going to fail forward into our purpose, I think. What do you think?
Yeah,
it
I
feels
agree.
like it's right.
I agree. And, recently what I've been processing is because I found myself again in a season that I did not expect to be in. But what I'm learning currently is that when we finally stop fighting our season, whether it's a hard season of suffering or we just feel like we're working so hard and we don't see what we're praying for yet, once we finally start fighting that and we can just live fully present into wherever God has us today, we actually can enjoy the process a lot more because it takes the weight off of us being the one who's holding it all together. And we can just rest in the fact that Jesus has done the finished work and we get to live this life in partnership with the Holy Spirit. And today we have everything we need. And he is going to get us where we need to go. He's going to show us the right people at the right time, and we don't have to overthink it, which I so often do.
No, and we can just accept where we are. I love that idea. I love how you bring that up because so much of our frustration comes from this sense of denial. We don't want to be where we are. But when we accept it as, okay, this is my season. And then when we confess our sins or frustrations or fears or whatever they are to God, all that is, it's more than this, but it's at its root, it's acceptance. And then it's realizing that you're just accepting what's happening and you're saying, God, you already know this, but I'm accepting it. I'm telling you. And since you already know this, you want me to tell you anyway, which I don't always understand. But I'm realizing it may be more for me than him because now I start to realize, okay, I may not be in control. And that's okay because he is working it out and he is present with me in this distress. And even though things aren't perfect or clean, that doesn't mean that I can't move forward in life and care for others along my path. And so, yeah, Hannah, thank you. Thanks for just being here. Thanks for being on this episode. And thanks for just helping us process this idea.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's an ongoing journey. I don't think we'll ever have it figured out as much as I want to. But I love, and you brought this up, something that I just keep coming back to and I hope is encouraging to whoever is listening is that it feels so scary sometimes to be out of control, but really the freedom that we crave and that we need is finally getting to that place of surrender.
That's it. And that is such a great encouragement to end on because we run from surrender, but maybe we're running in the wrong direction.
Right.
Hannah, thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.